Can I start? Okay. How can economics, globalization, and racial tension come together to form a new cultural phenomenon? This is what happened with the development of the tango in Argentina between 1880 and 1913. Today, I will explain how the tango became popular and developed through a process of Black cultural identity, economic disparity, and globalization, which launched tango into the world stage. First of all, though we think of the tango as a Latin dance, it actually has its roots in African tradition. According to the historian Simon Collier, between 1880 and 1930, more than 3 million Africans arrived through the port of Buenos Aires in Argentina, and many of them chose to settle there in what we refer to as barrios, which is Spanish for neighborhoods, which were poor areas surrounding the city. In these areas, in which blacks were often discriminated against by the government and by wealthy white Argentinians, there was a strong sense of cultural identity, as these groups of people fervently sought to maintain their sense of identity through various forms of song and dance. This is where the tango came about. The tango has its roots in African styles of dance, but as it developed in Latin America, it began to take on many characteristics of other Latin styles of dance, such as the habanera, the waltz, and the polka. Eventually, this became its own style of dance, which was distinguished within these communities of Black immigrants in Buenos Aires. And this dance became very popular in both brothels and saloons. However, the white Argentinians at the time did not like this at all. And in fact, the government would go so far as to pass laws banning Afro-Argentines from gathering and dancing in public. Which brings me to my second point, the economic disparity which helped lead to the rise of tango. In Argentina, after the Civil War, almost everyone lived in one of two sections in Buenos Aires, the centro or the barrios. The barrios, which I just discussed, were essentially the ghettos of Argentina. They were squalid, disgusting living conditions. Most of the people who lived there were slaves or immigrants, and they were not good places to live. Everyone else lived in the centro. The centro was the wealthy section of Buenos Aires, and the people who lived there referred to themselves as porteños, people of the port in Spanish. And they considered themselves to be white Europeans who just happened to be living in Argentina. And through a process that the anthropologist Julie Taylor refers to as whitening, the groups of people in these areas sought to emphasize white European culture and to denigrate aspects of Black Afro-Argentine culture. They did so by passing laws which banned blacks from gathering in public and easily just disparaging any forms of dance, song, or any expressions of Black culture that they sought as unfit to be proper Argentinian or European culture. Ironically, however, these governments, which were passing these laws in this whitening process, only increased the appeal of this risque dance for one certain group of people. And that group of people is young white Argentinian men. Which brings me to my third point, globalization, which boosted tango into world popularity. In the centro, groups of young, wealthy white Argentinian men who were porteños would often go into the barrios late at night as their primary form of entertainment. They would go to the saloons and the brothels, which were developed by these Black immigrants, and they would learn to tango there. And eventually, these groups of young men made the tango very popular, and they ended up teaching the dance to their bachelor friends. And in 1910, these groups of young men brought the tango to Europe, specifically to Paris. And within just 3 years, the tango had become incredibly popular all over Europe. It spread from Paris to London to Berlin and eventually to New York. This was something that the porteños in Buenos Aires did not like. They sought to disparage any aspects of Black cultural expression, but since they sought to emulate aspects of European white culture, they were forced reluctantly to accept that this culture of the tango was now a part of their culture because it emulated European culture. And by 1913, the tango had become incredibly prominent in both the wealthy and the poor areas of Buenos Aires in Argentina. In fact, before that, these groups of young men who had contributed to the spread of tango, they sought to emulate these groups of people who lived in the barrios, even going so far as to paint their faces black and referring to themselves as los negros. And ironically, the condemnation that the Argentinian government brought upon this style of dance only contributed to its spread further. And without such condemnation by the government, the dance never would have been as popular as it was because it didn't have that risque, scorned appeal that made it so popular to these groups of young men. And by 1913, in Buenos Aires, the tango had become very popular, especially in a section called La Boca, where famous singers such as Carlos Gardel brought new instruments such as the mandolin and the guitar to the new style of dance called the tango. They played with instruments such as flutes and drums. And eventually, the tango became integrated in culture, national identity. So, as you can see, I've just explained the development of the tango through cultural, and it's actually similar to what happened with jazz music, where jazz was something that was actively oppressed, and eventually it just became more popular because they take from the development is that the more we seek to oppress a culture, the more we'll make it popular, because cultural change is inevitable, and all we can do is ultimately accept that.